So this is always a big topic from a freelancing and consultancy side of things is what white label SEO actually is and how the process generally works. Um, and it's quite an interesting one because there's a few different ways that white label SEO can work. I have two ways that I offer it personally. So through my consultancy site, so that's where I've written this white label SEO guide. And then also actually through completewhitelabel.com. So this is where agencies and businesses can just go on and they can order individual elements of an SEO campaign. But for the purposes of this, I think let's just focus more on the consultancy side, and you can see how the approach tends to work. Okay, so how does the process usually work from a consultancy and a freelancer perspective? If you're an agency and you maybe got a new SEO client or a current client that you've got wants extra work, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to hire someone short term. So the way that I would propose that an agency does this, just to make sure that they're getting the absolute most out of what someone offering white label SEO can do, is first you've obviously got to do your research. So look for freelancers who might already be ranking for certain things. You've got platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, which sometimes can be a little bit hit and miss, or just go through referral networks. Obviously, you've got the likes of LinkedIn as well, or people talking about this sort of stuff. But generally, you want to have quite a decent pool of people that you want to work through to interview rather than just going with the first person that you find. Because, there's a lot of really good people in SEO out there, but it might just be that you prefer the way that someone approaches how they do their audits or how they do their link building. And you won't know how to compare that if you're just talking to one person. So I think that's the first one, is having like an interview process in the same way that you would have for new hires. So ultimately you want a freelancer or an outsourced provider that you can rely on long term. Having an excess of work or new clients that come in on short term projects isn't unheard of from an agency side. So just having people that you can rely on long term makes sense. I mean, personally, a lot of my white label work and clients I've worked with for years, that's just it just tends to be how these things work. So yeah, once you've found someone, or once you've started to go through that interview process with someone, I think it makes sense to give an initial task to them, just sort of vets what they're saying against what they're actually doing ultimately. That can sometimes be, it might just be an audit process from a sheet that you provided, or whatever task it might be, or sometimes it could be just how they prefer to do things, and then that just gets your brand input on it at the end of the project or at the end of the task. So really, it's however you would want to work it, from that side of things, as the person looking for outsourced SEO support. So that's the way I would recommend, is sort of start with at least a couple of people that you're speaking to, get a sense of who's going to work best with you, maybe do an initial task or two just to get an idea of what they're delivering, and then you can start to roll things out from there, rather than put all your eggs in one basket and then have potential issues later down the line. And what should you actually be expecting from a white label SEO provider? So from my side, as someone who does it quite a lot, I think this really just comes down to communication, as does the next point on what not to expect. And for me, that tends to come from work that's being delivered versus communication on the client side. So for the vast majority of white label processes, the provider signs a non-disclosure agreement, or you just operate under the assumption that everything is a non-disclosure agreement. So for example, with this agency site, we will sign non-disclosure agreements, but because a lot of the time it's just single link orders or digital PR orders or content orders, we tend not to, but we would just never share that work anyway, unless it was a public one where the client said, yeah, you're fine to use this as a case study. But other than that, everything is just assumed that it's under an NDA, whether it's signed or not. But yeah, the big one from my side that I've seen is when there's a miscommunication around who speaks to the client. So often when you're a consultant and you work on a day rate, or it's X amount for a certain task or a strategy or however it is, the time is for that work. There's a lot of time that then goes into speaking to clients, getting on calls, all that sort of stuff. And it's much harder for the consultant or the provider to understand their sort of hours, in terms of, I've allocated X amount to this task and now I've got another half a day or a day needed in the month to speak to clients and do all that. And I think that's also coming under what not to expect as well. Like if you've agreed on the approach is going to be task based or strategy based, that's what it needs to be. The best ways I've seen white label SEO work tends to be much more from agencies where sort of everything is already in place from a sort of client com side, and the provider is just then working on an individual strategy or tasks or whatever it is, but the communication comes from account managers or from within the agency, rather than from a sort of outsourced provider who has to pretend they're head of SEO for an agency or whatever it might be. Sometimes it can work. It makes it much easier for both parties if it's a little bit more black and white on, like, we're clear on what this is going to be, rather than like an ambiguous retainer type of thing that, yeah, you can just sort of really come into issues later down the line. And then finally, just some examples of SEO work that you can outsource. So, I mean, it can be anything really. Like I say, it could be entire strategies. It could be individual tasks that you need just sort of overspill help with. Someone might be ill on your team or take an extended leave and you just need someone to sort of plug that gap. What I tend to find personally is it can be a bit of a blend. So there's some agencies that I work with where it might be a couple of days a month and it sort of changes based on what's required throughout the month, or what we want to prioritize. If there might be a migration coming up, or we might have extra budget to explore digital PR and link building. Or you can go down that more productized route, and like I say, that's where something like Complete White Label offers individual elements as well. It's like auditing, niche edits, blogger outreach, journalist requests, individual pieces of content. So really, it's how you want to work it. So I think from a sort of strategy and a long-term side, if we're working with a freelancer or a consultant, makes a lot of sense. If it's individual productized elements, then maybe working with something like Complete White Label or a white label SEO agency provider where it is purely productized. But either way, there's certainly really good people out there, really good sort of B2B SEO agencies out there who just focus on those individual elements as well. So hopefully this gives a bit of a whistle-stop background on what white label SEO actually is, how the process does tend to work, and ultimately what your options are for outsourcing. It doesn't just have to be one thing or the other. There are options out there for however you want to approach outsourcing and for what you actually need it for.